In the interests of efficiency, I have decided to distill every argument I have ever had with your average statist, so that I can hand it out to those who argue that government is voluntary, if I don't like it I can leave, taxation is not violence, etc. I thought this might be of use to you, since life is short. It goes a little something like this. Me. Tell me, do you think that violence is wrong? Statist. Yes, violence is wrong, except in self-defense. Me. Agreed, except in self-defense. So tell me, how do you think that problems should be solved if we should not use violence? Statist. Well, I think that people should become more active in government, and that governments should do ABC, X, Y, and Z. Me. So how do you reconcile your objection to violence with your support of government programs, since government programs are paid for through taxation, which is coercion? Statist. Huh? What you talking about? Taxation is not coercive. Me. Taxation is coercive, since if you do not pay your taxes, you are kidnapped at gunpoint and thrown in jail, where, if you try to escape, you are shot. Statist. But this is a democracy. We choose our own governments. Me. Being offered a choice between two violent alternatives is not the same as being free to choose. If a store owner gets to choose which mafia gang he pays protection money to, can it really be argued that he is making a free choice? If a woman can choose between two potential husbands but will be forced to marry one of them, can she really be said to be choosing marriage? The only way that we can know the only way that we know that the people are freely choosing governments is if they have the choice not to choose a government. Statist. Well, there is a social contract which binds people to governments. Me. There is in fact no such thing as a social contract. Unless they have been granted power of attorney, people cannot justly sign contracts on behalf of others. If one man has the power to unilaterally impose his will on another and call it a contract, then logically a man can rape a woman and call it lovemaking. Statist. But I accept the social contract, and so do you if you drive on the roads. Me. First of all, your choice to honor a contract does not give you the right to force me to honor it. You can choose to buy a house, but you cannot justly force me to pay for it. If you forge my signature, I am not bound to honor the contract, and I have never agreed to a social contract of any kind. Secondly, it is true that I use government services, but that is irrelevant to the central moral question of coercion. If a slave accepts a meal from his master, is he condoning slavery? Statist. I suppose not. But still, you implicitly accept the social contract by continuing to live in a country, as Socrates argued. Me. Do you think that it would be just for me to create a social contract which stated that I could rob anyone who lives in my neighborhood? And that if people continue to live in, quote, my neighborhood, that they are expressly consenting to my new social contract? Statist. Well, no, but then we are talking about individuals. But we are talking about governments, not individuals. Me. Is the government not composed of individuals? Is the government not just a label for a group of individuals who claim the moral right to initiate force against others, a right they define as evil for those they use violence against? In other words, if you take away all the individuals who compose the government, do you still have a government? Statist. I suppose not, but that is besides the point. You say that taxation is violence, but I have paid taxes my entire life, and I have never had a gun pointed to my head. Me. Sure, and a slave may not be beaten if he obeys his master. The definition of slavery is not being beaten, but the right to beat. If the slave stays because he fears violence and conforms to his master's wishes as a direct result of the threat of violence, the situation is utterly immoral, even if no direct violence actually occurs. Many women are raped with knives to their throats. The fact that their throats are not cut does not mean that it is not rape. Statist. Yes, however, I do not accept the premise of that the government uses force to extract taxation from citizens. Me. All right. Is there anything that the government does that you disagree with? Do you agree, for instance, with the invasion of Iraq? Statist. No, I think that the invasion of Iraq was morally wrong. Me. You do realize that the war in Iraq is only possible because you pay your taxes. Statist. To some degree, of course. Me. If the war in Iraq is morally wrong, but only possible because you pay your taxes, and your taxes are not extracted from you through force, then you are voluntarily funding and enabling that which you call evil. Can you explain to me why you are doing that? Statist. I'm doing that because I'm a citizen of this country. If I disagree with the war, then I should run for office and try to stop it. Me. That doesn't follow at all. For instance, if you were against child abuse, would you voluntarily fund a group dedicated to abusing children? Statist. Of course not. Me. And if you did claim to be against child abuse, and you voluntarily funded a group dedicated to abusing children, and I said that you should stop doing that, and you replied that you would not, but that if someone was against this abusive group, they should try to infiltrate this group, take control of it, and somehow stop it from abusing children. Would that make any sense at all? Statist. I guess not. Me. Would you agree that if you were against the war in Iraq, but volunteered for the war in Iraq, and agreed to fight without a salary and spent your own money to cover all your expenses, that your position would be utterly incomprehensible? That you would claim to be against something and then expend enormous amounts of time, effort, money, and resources supporting it? Statist. Yes, that would make little sense. Me. Thus, do you see that your position that the war in Iraq is a moral evil, but that you are voluntarily funding it through your taxes, makes no sense at all? If the war in Iraq is a moral evil, but it is only enabled through your funding, then continuing to fund it voluntarily is to openly admit that it is not a moral evil. If you are forced to fund the war in Iraq, then you can maintain that it is a moral evil because it is the initiation of the use of force. However, the taxation that is also the initiation of the use of force against you must also be a moral evil because you are forced to fund the initiation of force against others. Thus, either taxation is coercion, or you are the worst form of moral hypocrite by voluntarily supporting that which you call evil. Does that make sense? Statist. I can certainly see that position. Me. Can you find any logical flaws in my position? Statist. No, but still think that you're wrong. Me. Well, I'm certainly glad that you are watching this video then, rather than debating me directly, because, as I said at the beginning, life is too short to waste time arguing with fools.